We are really keen to discuss and to learn and listen from you suggestions about how we can move forwards together in what are such testing times. And yesterday's focus was on buildings and getting dancers back to fitness and festivals going online. And today is specifically about artists and choreographers and makers. But before we start I would like to very much welcome Justine Simons, who's the Deputy Mayor for Culture and the Creative Industries. Justine has a long history in dance, and I was thinking back, I think, Justine, did you used to run Chisholm Hill Dance Space, if I'm...
Yeah.
Yes, you did. Okay, yeah. Great. Well, I would just like to welcome you and hand over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Welcome.
Welcome to you with this co-hosted thing. You know, it's just really brilliant to be working with you all and to see such an awesome and incredible group of people on this call. And it just kind of really demonstrates, you know, the extraordinary world-beating dance sector we have in this country. You know, how important it is that we do everything we can to work together, support each other and support you so that we can kind of emerge in the best place, you know, after this pandemic. I spent the first 10 years of my career in contemporary dance, so it's an area really close to my heart. I just thought it was worth acknowledging those difficult circumstances at the start, because of course yesterday we had these new statistics that we'd worked with the Creative Industries Federation on, and we as the GLA, as the Mayor's Office, co-funded them in order to get the London slice of the data. And what we now know is that London is looking to be the hardest hit from coronavirus in terms of the creative economy. We're looking at losing 110,000 jobs and 14.6 billion loss of from the economy. And the context for that is that, you know, we almost just before COVID hit, we'd had our latest economic figures, which showed that the creative economy in London was worth 58 billion. So it is such a big and important part of the economy. It's growing kind of 5 times faster than the economy at large, and so to have these statistics, I mean, we knew it was bad, but I think it is always important to capture that data and have those arguments, even though it's a kind of devastating picture. It's important to have those figures to argue and champion for resources and help right now. So yeah, I just thought I'd say that. And then the other thing, of course, which you are all super aware of, is, you know, what we have seen really exposed is the fragility in the labour market, in the, you know, because of the kind of particular working conditions within the creative sector, and especially in dance. You know, so many freelancers, so many creative practitioners hit super hard. 63% of freelancers have lost 100% of their work. So again, I think a question
Justine, we just lost you for a second. We just lost you for a second there. You said 63%.
Yeah, I was just mentioning about the kind of fragility within the labour market, the creative labour market. You know, how so many freelancers, and 63% of freelancers have lost 100% of their work. So it's just really exposed that fragility in the labour market. And I think something for me that I am really keen to push forward in a kind of recovery mode is, you know, how can we kind of fix some of these systemic problems in our labour market? How can it be that, you know, the average salary of a dance artist is below the living minimum wage, you know? Do you know what I mean? I think there's some kind of fundamentals here that we've got to kind of keep hold of. The purpose of today really is just to say we're just really interested to be with you on this journey to bring people together. We're just finding more and more that, you know, we're all in this kind of like learning process at the same time. I'm doing it with my counterparts in World Cities. Emma, you came to kind of different cross-sector roundtables we've had where we learned, for example, about what film we're doing. And you know, I think the more we can kind of keep close and learn from each other right now, the better. And just for people, in case there was anyone who wasn't here yesterday, I'll just in 1 minute just tell you what we're up to in the Mayor's Office. The few big highlight things that we've been doing, we already had a culture at risk office, which I describe as the bat phone. So it's a kind of helpline for people, mainly kind of grassroots and artist studios who kind of struggle with things like licensing, rents, you know, contracts, etc. and we've supersized that, and we've borrowed people from other teams across City Hall to supersize it, and we've got about 500 cases live on that now, and it's a helpline really to help signpost and support people. And I guess the difference in character with it now is that it's now, you know, the South Bank Centre are on that, so are the Royal Albert Hall, as well as the kind of usual kind of grassroots. So we've been doing that, and we managed to get together 2.3 million of emergency small grants for those very vulnerable parts of the ecosystem that we have been working with and tracking for many years. So that's like grassroots music venues, artist studios, LGBT clubs, and the tiny number of independent cinemas we've got in the capital. We've been doing roundtables as we are today. We've been lobbying government. I'm happy to share with you all the things we've been lobbying government on, if that is helpful at any point. I know there's lots of common ground with what the dance sector has been calling for. And then if people don't already know about this, if it wasn't mentioned yesterday, there's a Pay It Forward scheme that we are running, and it's all for small businesses in London. And it's a way for members of the public to kind of buy a ticket in advance, or buy a product in advance, or something with a small business, which includes culture organisations and businesses too. So it's just worth kind of bearing that in mind. There's quite a few arts organisations have signed up to that. It's just another kind of helpful tool, really. So that was it, really. I just wanted to say, you know, I'm really, really happy to be here, and to say, you know, we are in solidarity with you, and we're open to anything you think that we can do to support you.
Fantastic, Justine. Thank you very much. And just to everybody let you know, the Pay It Forward link has just gone up on the chat. It's really good to hear that. Justine, thank you so much for being with us. I'm just going to summarise very briefly what we looked at yesterday, which was an international picture, and then pathways for helping dancers to get back to fitness. The results of John's Breaking Convention Festival going online, that's normally live at Sadler's Wells, and then proactive responses from the local London dance venue as a result of COVID at East London Dance. So today's focus is on artists. I'm hoping we're going to have a bit more time for discussion today after the speakers, because there were several important points that came up yesterday. One of them Justine has already really referred to, which was how as a sector we can support freelancers who've been hit so very hard. The increase in the civic role for arts organisations and individuals in these times. The monetization of digital works and online classes. And then the idea of creating guidelines for the dance sector specifically, and as the film sector has done in such a comprehensive way. So again, I hope we can listen in a sort of open-minded and generous way today, and support each other as best we can. And as yesterday, I wanted to open with someone giving an overview, and I'm just really grateful that Andrew Hurst is here. Andrew is the Chief Executive of One Dance UK. And Andrew, I'd like to invite you to glamorously unmute yourself, and over to you.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So just a bit of background on me. I'm Andrew, I'm Chief Executive of One Dance UK. As Emma said, I was a professional dancer for 15 years and split my performing career pretty much half and half between Europe and the UK. I also worked as a manager of various dance companies for 10 years and toured the world both as a dancer and a manager. And whilst the focus of One Dance UK's work is really on supporting dance and those who work in dance in the UK, I'm also chair of Company Chameleon, who tour internationally. I'm the director of Dance Consortium, and I also work as a consultant on international projects, particularly in Cuba or with Cuban companies and artists. So that international context and perspective is particularly important to me also. I was always a union or company representative in all the companies I worked in, and even as a manager, I was very focused on improving conditions for dancers. So this conversation today is very important to me. A little bit of background on One Dance UK, for those of you who don't know. Advocacy, political engagement and lobbying are a hugely important part of what we do, and it's a massive focus of my work personally. From the very beginning, we've been focused and very active on the issues that matter most to all of us working in dance. So things that we mentioned already: support for freelancers, the impact of education policy, and of course Brexit, just to name a few things. We've built excellent working relationships with government, parliamentarians and civil servants, and are a trusted partner. Now, what this means is that when policymakers and politicians are considering and discussing issues that affect all of us and the arts more broadly, we have a seat at that table and dance has a voice. So I wanted to give you a bit of a macro view on the lockdown and guidance that's been mentioned. So right from the beginning of the pandemic crisis, we've been in regular contact with government and officials, reporting on the needs of the sector, shortfalls in the support that's already on offer, and putting forward solutions. And this is really to ensure that dance has a voice and remains on the agenda. Over the past few weeks, the focus has slowly shifted towards reopening, and we've been helping the government to develop COVID secure guidance for return to work for the performing arts. And this guidance will enable dance activity to restart in phase 3 of the UK government's roadmap to recovery. The earliest date for phase 3 in England is July the 4th, but it also depends on what's happening with the virus in the community, the COVID alert level, and the famous R number that we're hearing so much about. So it's likely to be later in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And some of this terminology about steps and phases can be very confusing, so I'm happy to answer questions about that afterwards. But 4 minutes is really not enough to cover everything. What I really wanted to do is to reassure you that there is guidance coming for our sector, and also to reassure you that other countries are several weeks, if not months, ahead of us in this process. So there's a lot to be learned internationally, and actually even from sport in this country, which is a good month and a half or so ahead of us. So the last thing really I wanted to highlight is that One Dance UK has got a range of resources specifically on dancers' health. And recently we created a series of webinars on how to maintain physical and mental health and well-being during this incredibly challenging time. And we'll be running online Q&A sessions with our dance medicine and science expert panel weekly once the government guidance has been published, as well as giving a lot more practical advice on how the guidance relates to individuals and organisations working across a range of different dance contexts. So there are still lots and lots of questions that remain unanswered, but a huge amount of progress has been made, and I'm confident, I was going to say quietly confident, but no, I'm very confident that we'll all be able to start moving more again very soon. And our efforts are very much focused on making sure that it's safe when we're allowed to do that.
Fantastic, Andrew, thank you. There's a question from Nadine Patel about... Oh.
Sorry to talk across you there, Emma. Just
that's fine. Having a swap over moment.
You and I can do our swap over moment. Thank you.
There we go.
You keep going.
You all right?
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Andrew, there's a question from Nadine Patel about what's the timeline for those guidelines. Just wondered if you could give us an indication.
Yeah, so they're in a kind of fairly advanced draft form at the moment. There's quite convoluted kind of structure around the task force for cultural renewal and different working groups. So the kind of process is a bit convoluted, but it's in a pretty good advanced draft form. And we were expecting some broader consultation to happen this week. It's now looking like that will happen next week, but it's very close to being in a form that can be published. So within the next couple of weeks, there should be something published. And then there's obviously a kind of job of work around adding practical advice and guidance to that as well.
Great, great. Thank you very much. There's more questions, but I'm going to move on for now and hope that we can have time to come back. So thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you. I do want to now move on to the first artist we're going to talk to. The agenda, someone was asking about the agenda. It's just the order that's on the list. So we're going to be speaking to Akram Khan, then Rosemary Lee, then Jeanefer Jean Charles, and then Shobana Jeyasingh before we open up. So Akram, I just wondered if you're there and in the room.
I am. Hi.
Hello, there you are. Hello, hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So we are just going to have a quick conversation, you and I, about how things are for you right now. And I suppose my first question was really about how you've been managing during lockdown. I know you've decided not to go ahead with a project you mentioned just because of all that was going on in terms of homeschooling and everything else. I just wondered if you could share with us how you've been managing and what tips you might have learned
Well, I think, I mean, I think for me, it's really been a sense of change. How do we adapt to new change? First of all, it's important to recognize that there is something changing in our daily life. And I think when we come out of it, that's going to be another change. So there are two changes to happen. But the way I'm dealing with it is really a structure. You know, I put myself into a new structure. But what's really important to say is that I take the old structure and the present structure, and I merge the two. So I don't just work within the old structure, because that's unrealistic, and that means I'm also in denial. So I created a structure which incorporates both my work practice and my parental duties. What's really crucial for me is not to be entirely still. That's the danger, and lose momentum, which, as long as I have momentum and as long as I have a structure to move in, it gives me a sense of purpose and hope.
Do you mean physically and mentally, Akram, or
Both.
do you mean, yeah, okay.
Both, yeah. I mean, you know, I'm not touring, of course, this year, and the company's not touring, so I'm not also in creation. And I just had a conversation with Catherine Hunter, this wonderful actress, yesterday, and we were talking about how we're dealing with, you know, this stillness, and are we being creative? And personally, I've not been creative because I'm still grieving from George Floyd and all of that. So there's a lot of important questions to be asked in ourselves and how we operate, how we see the world. And in order to do that, I have to structure the day so I have some time for myself to be able to reflect. Because when you're with two small kids, it's pretty insane.
Hard to find that time. And going forwards, Akram, in terms of the future, I know your company does a lot of international touring, and that's, I think, the majority of income comes from that. I just wondered what your thoughts are about the longer term.
I think it's temporary term. That's what I can talk about. I can't talk about the long term. I think it's very difficult to talk about long term because the ground hasn't settled yet. It's still shifting. The world that we left behind, it's still transforming, and we don't know what it's going to transform to. But so I feel a bit powerless, but in talking about the future. But what I do feel is important is I have to be careful that I don't just forget the past or erase the past. So this is a moment for me and the company to look back at our past, not forget it, not erase it. That's the danger. But to relook at it, to examine it, to see how we can move forward with so many pandemics going on right now, and has been going on for a while. Of course, COVID is pretty new, but Black Lives Matters, that's going on forever. But many other pandemics, whether it's to talk about, especially with touring, how do we tour? This is another point. How do we tour with climate change? You know, that being, so does our touring model change? So these are all things that, what's important is that we take action to talk about it and to discuss possible things that we could make better. And I think that's where we are at.
Are there any things that you're discussing that you think will have a lasting change in how you're working as a result of what's going on right now?
I don't to say. It's really hard. It would be a real guess. Yeah, I mean, everything is shifting every week, as you know. Yeah. So the rules are changing every week. And I think what's really important also is that we built a sense of trust on the ground beneath us that we're standing on. But that trust has to be built on a ground that's still, that's not moving.
And it's still moving at present.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it makes me think about what space can be found for reflection at this time, and I'm sure we'll come back, Akram, but it raises I suppose lots of questions about how we can use this time when the uncertainty can in fact create a certain freedom of thinking, possibly. I don't know. But thank you so much. I'm sorry to hurry. Good to hear your thoughts, and we'll come back to you later. Thank you. I'd like to move over to Rosalie, choreographer and performer. who I believe is also here with us in the room. Rosie, are you there?
I am. Hello. Hi.
Hi,
I'm going
Rosie,
to, thanks for inviting me. I'm going to try to keep to time. I know how hard that is with 45 minutes. So I'm actually going to read something, which is most unlike me. And also it's a bit philosophical, and perhaps I'm writing to myself somehow to keep some sort of notion of where the heart of what we do is. So that's what I've tried to do. So first of all, I just want to say that if I make any suggestion that I'm finding some positive outcomes in the situation we're in, I don't want to in any way suggest that that takes away from the overwhelming grief and loss that everybody is facing. And I feel we haven't actually been allowed to collectively grieve, and there may be a reason for that, but maybe the arts has a place for that, but the constant sort of positive upbeatness sometimes unsettles me. It's changed a lot since George Floyd, but before that there was this sort of, you know, it's this weird mixture of we all know what it was. So over the last couple of months I've definitely put my choreographic brain to sleep, and I'm trying not to enforce any creativity. If I do make anything new or try to adapt something, then it feels really important to me to maintain the same standards that I used before, and not to suddenly try and dash something off. So that's partly why I've just put the brakes on. I'm researching building a website and trying to take stock of my body of work really and reflect. And over the last 30 years of working as a choreographer, there have been fallow periods, i.e. dormant periods, that have been enforced sometimes and sometimes against my choice. And if you think about fallowness in terms of cultivation of land, the soil needs fallow time. It needs to replenish, and it needs it in order to become more fertile. So maybe in a market-driven system that we live in, where production and marketable output have become more and more important, almost a reason for living, perhaps, life can't be sustained if we just 24/7 produce, or extract. So in this really tragic time when some of us have hit pause, maybe that enforced dormancy might reap rewards that we or I can't fathom further down the road. I'm really wary of trying to second guess the future. I don't want to do that, just as Akram said. But what I kind of keep trying to do for myself, and so therefore humbly suggest, is that we take time to reflect on what matters to us as individuals, as artists, and as a society, and to remold a society that's inclusive, where power is shared more democratically, where culture is accessible to everyone, where the earth is protected and nurtured, means a bit of a radical overhaul. But it can be done. We can see how fast some things can change. How could we help the dance world on its direction of travel? Could it be better than it was before? So similarly, I've been trying to think I'm trying to take the time to think what matters to me as an artist and as a maker. And for me personally, it's about sharing. It's about offering a gift. And in return for that gift, my reward is to witness some individual or an audience being moved. And so for me, it's about the affective relationship between art and the viewer. And I guess also that's what gives me a reason for living, because it gives me a sort of sense of purpose and being useful, a useful citizen. And I think that's what's been taken away from all of us, whether we're artists or not, and why it's so hard, because most people's desire is to be useful and to have purpose. Can we focus on artists, audiences, participants, and access? If we have dark theatres, could they be opened and used in some way to facilitate safe, small encounters through the day, supporting a very local community around them? Just as cathedrals were once multi-purpose spaces, so could theatres become more centres for community? Local hubs were mentioned yesterday, and I think I'm probably suggesting something a little similar, so that people don't have to travel so much. On the other hand, I'm thinking of the wonderful National Theatre of Scotland, where there's no building, and where the art travels and is imagined in different communities and spaces. But both these approaches that seem diametrically opposed share a common theme, and that is to think locally. and to dig your roots in deeply where you are. In a sense, my work as a practitioner is quite close to a new model of working, you would argue, that people are starting to discuss. It takes place outdoors, it's often local, often the participants come from a local area, it's durational, lots of people can see it, it's free to view. But even so, I still feel, I find it very hard to imagine how I could continue that work, because I feel so responsible for the experience of the audience and their well-being, and the experience of the participant and performer. And I can't imagine at the moment being able to give them the same depth of experience in the current circumstances. And just I want to end with saying that in terms of thinking about the racial justice movement, that dance as a social form and a theatre art usually involves a collective approach. It's based on a tacit understanding and cooperation. I think cooperation is at the heart of evolution, not competition. And I just imagine what we could do if we transferred those skills as dancers and dance artists that we should be so adept at in the studio and in performance for the furtherment of racial and social justice. Above all, to listen to each other, to empathize, to be willing to be moved in position and outlook, and with those skills to welcome the oppressed, the disadvantaged, the prejudiced, and to share with compassion and openness. Thank you.
Great, Rosie, thank you very much for that and for the considered thought in there. You mentioned at the very beginning about how we haven't been allowed to grieve. I just wondered, who do you feel is not allowing?
Yeah, I realised that as I read it. I thought, I'm going to get myself in deep water. No, I don't sort of believe there's some sort of conspiracy. I think perhaps we all feel we better not, you know, that it's not just the media and the government. Well, actually, no, it is the government. It's the way Boris Johnson talks about it. It's the kind of the way the numbers just drift off the tongue. It's as if we're trying to just smudge that out somehow. I mean, it's very different after George Floyd, and in a way, that's why it's been so powerful. I think some of us can get some of the grief and anger about COVID out. You know what I mean? It's almost cathartic in that way. But I do feel like it's about trauma. And when you look at other cultures that have gone through trauma, like Germany, they washed over, you know, the Holocaust, and for a long time until they could face it. And maybe it's something about washing away because it's too much to deal with, but the numbers are massive. Yeah. And they're just massive, and
need to be looked at.
It's very difficult. I understand the difficulty.
Thank you very much. There's several people asking.
Sorry,
we're handing over, Joe. Over switch. We all right? Fantastic. Yeah, there's several people in chat asking for a copy of that, Rosie, so we might be in touch to follow up. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Jeanefer Jean Charles now, who's the creative director of Jeanefer Jean Charles and Associates. I can see you there, so I know you're in the room, which is fantastic. Over to you, darling.
Okay, hello everyone, and I'd just like to say thank you, Jacqueline Rose from GLA, for inviting me to be on this round table, and thank you, Emma. So I'm Jeanefer. Today I am an artistic director, or have been, a choreographer and a mass movement specialist. It's really strange times, and I have got a bit of a dilemma as a freelance artist. I've been working for the last 2 years on a piece entitled Black Victorians, and it's really largely about telling stories that haven't been told about British history. And I actually began this about 2 years ago and have so far worked on phase 1 and 2. Phase 3, which is now, looks very different now thanks to COVID, and I'm faced with the dilemma, how do I move forward? Interestingly, because it's about the Black Victorians, it's literally about the discovery of several Black people during the Victorian era on portraits. It just feels so right now that I continue producing this work. Sorry, I've just lost my thread there for a while. So if I go back to what my plan was as an artist, the plan was to go into rehearsal and work creatively on using what I have done so far in my 2 R&Ds and take this version out to into the outdoors. And so far, what I'm faced with is either cancelling this project altogether or somehow making it happen. Thanks to Bradley at Greenwich Festival, there is an opportunity now for me to take on phase 3 and look at how I can have a performance at the end of August. But I'm faced with all these dilemmas. How can I keep my dance safe? How can I be safe? Will I really do myself justice and credit if I just go ahead, because really there's something about wanting to do something rather than lying dormant. So right now for me, there are just so many questions rather than answers. As I mentioned, interestingly, because of the whole Black Lives Matter, it may seem that Black Victorians is about jumping on the bandwagon. It may even seem like Greenwich Festival is wanting to make this happen because it's so right now. But I'm trying to hold on to the authenticity, which is that I started this 2 years ago. I just happened to get into this place and this time where it's really, really relevant. And yeah, my sort of dilemmas is, how do I make this happen? I need technical support in order to continue creating this, both through Zoom rehearsals and on site. My budget has quadrupled because of the extra support I need to make this happen. And I've also lost some partners because they've basically lost all their funding. Thank you. That's my dilemma.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Thank you. So in terms of going forwards, Jeanefer, then, is it, there's a lot of different things you're juggling, some of which are unknown, and plus additional costs. So in terms of your vision for it in the future, in terms of timescale and that, how has your planning had to shift?
Well, I was supposed to be putting this piece on now at the Greenwich Festival this month, so that's shifted. I'm talking about producing this piece in August, and knowing that when the government announces the third phase 3 of lockdown, even while I'm talking about trying to make it possible, it may not be possible if the infection rates go up. So right now I'm just taking it one step at a time. I've gone on a site visit and I've done the social distancing. I've had Zoom meetings with my dancers and said, are you prepared to give this a go? And I've been speaking to my designers and reviewing the work I had so far and looking at what's possible. What's really interesting actually is this could actually create new possibilities in terms of opportunities and creative thinking. So I feel it's already shifting. For example, how do I make a duet work when I really ideally don't want to put the dancers together? And so it's really got me, you know, it's a challenging process, but also quite exciting.
Needs active adjustments. Thank you. You also mentioned about safety, and I think that's something that we might come back to, that Kate Scanlon brought up also, in particularly for Black artists and those from other minorities that are more at risk, and it's something I'd like to come back to later in terms of safety. But before then, I just want to quickly move over to our final speaker, which is Shobana Jeyasingh, who's the artistic director of Shobana Jeyasingh Dance. Shobana, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
There you are. Hello and welcome. Thanks for being with us.
So lovely to be with you here all, and thank you so much for inviting me. So when I was asked to give a personal perspective on creativity during this time, I just found myself actually being incredibly practical, because I think I'm a kind of person who needs to act to reflect. And I find reflection also for me is an active activity. So I'll start with where I was when lockdown happened. So I was all set up to do a week of R&D in June to prepare for my next project. So the dancers in the studio had been booked. Then of course COVID struck. But I decided not to cancel or postpone, but rather to do it via Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, or anything else on offer. I felt that we all needed to exercise our creative muscles, because they too, like other muscles in our body lose tone, and they lose strength and flexibility if you leave them unused. So the dancers were probably a little bit surprised when I rang to ask them who they were living with at that point and whether they had bikes. As I suspected, some of them had dancers for partners who could help with a bit of dance partnering. So we used parks, back gardens, bedrooms, kitchens, and any spare partners available to generate and study movement. And although I probably would have got further in a studio in terms of movement, most of my aims for my R&D week were met. However, the most enduring aspect was that we became a bit like a family-like unit, since together we had to find solutions and build our own infrastructure, providing our own studios, filming ourselves, and finding rather remote ways of being surprisingly intimate. So we all belong to the independent sector, where some of the most innovative dance ideas are seeded and produced without the support and funding of large institutions. In this world, dancers need to be available at different times of the year and service a fragmented touring schedule. The dance economy expects to employ them for short periods, but also expects them to be fully trained and fit and step up to the needs of whatever the next production is. So at the moment, the government has many schemes of financial help for different types of workers. And this, to me, has shone a spotlight on the fact that the state has a role to play when markets stop providing employment for a period for unavoidable reasons. The pattern of employment for freelancers has always included such periods of unavoidable intervals as performance projects take shape and tours are organized. One of the saddest things in my life is to have seen many, many talented dancers leave professional dance for good because they just could not afford to be in it. And I fear that the current situation may very well make this worse. So I sincerely hope that since the whole of the UK, not just artists and dancers, have now had a taste of what an economic vulnerability feels like, we can institute something akin to maybe what the French system has, l'Intermittence du Spectacle, which is a permanent government scheme that acknowledges the intermittent work patterns of a professional performer. It provides a baseline financial stability so that more artists can live fully professional lives and make the creative choices that they want to make. At the moment, obviously, creativity has been largely about digital and the archival, and they've kept performance, the performing world alive a little bit. However, our relationship with this overcrowded screen is changing on a daily basis. So when I looked at my own archives to create our current online program, SJD Shorts, the first thing I realized was that archives too needed to be translated for the current viewing culture and to be creatively repurposed. So it was a kind of a moment of reflection. I think what Akram mentioned about looking at our past, not throwing it away, but thinking about it in a new light. So digital output and making interactive online work is one of the few upbeat stories of COVID-19. If it's possible to have any upbeat stories given then the huge number of deaths in our country. And also the social injustices which have come to, well, not that they've come to light recently, but they've been heard more widely recently. However, we need to slowly make a transition to a real three-dimensional and physically experienced life where everyone we encounter is not a potential threat to our health. I think here dance can be a very powerful motor. At the moment, 4 people in a household who have locked down together do not have to socially distance. I could create a trio with my son and spouse anytime I want. But how do we transfer this paradigm to a group of 4 dancers, for example? A small hub where the inmates can trust each other to touch, to take weight, to support, to create a physical narrative. A hub where the surrounding space is safe to touch. This could include testing, building in quarantine time, deep cleaning of spaces, making the rehearsal space perhaps also a lived-in space for a while, and working with medical consultants. I do hope that we can all get working on this as a matter of urgency, so that the virtual, which has delivered some very good things, like this event we're all part of at the moment, can make room for the physical in a way that is custom made for independent dance. Thank you.
Great, Shobana, thank you so much for those thoughts. I think there's a lot in there, not only the idea that's a little akin to the bubbles that I've heard talking about in terms of dances and rehearsals, but also how the unemployment works in France, which I think is also repeated in Belgium, where there is a recognition of that variability in freelance life and income. And I think they're both really good models that I think we could look to and should talk about more. I'm aware that we've
Emma, if we could just
yeah, over to you too.
That would be cheers. Thank you.
Grand, thanks, Annie. Fabulous. I know there's various questions that came up there, including about safety, and that it's a particular issue that I think came up both yesterday and today. I don't know if any of the panelists or anybody else wants to jump in here. If you do type in question to the chat, I can come to you more. I know there are some other freelancers in the room, including Fionn, who is our the artist that we've sponsored as part of the freelance task force. Fionn, I don't know if you're with us or you've got any thoughts. If you are, do chip in as someone working independently. It'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Emma, we had an early question from Raymond that I think was to Andrew. Raymond, are you happy to ask it, or would you like me to read it out for you?
I actually, sorry, I jumped in. I did respond to Raymond.
Okay,
I won't have seen that. Yes, it is a little bit frustrating that timelines are a bit different in the different nations across the UK, but effectively it's the same solid sound guidance that's going to work for all 4 nations, just that sadly the kind of phasing of it might be a bit different. And on the kind of safety and that kind of issue, I think there's 2 elements to that. One is about kind of safe workspaces, and we know already that there are lots of issues specifically for dance about making workspaces safe, and this is a kind of added layer of complexity, if you like, but it's basically another risk that needs managing in workspaces for dance. And the other aspect is about people getting back to practice safely after perhaps not having moved so much for a long time, or having only been able to move around in their kitchen and living room if they're lucky enough to have one that's big enough. So both of those things we're working on. The government guidance is basically about a framework and a process for assessment and management in relation to COVID, and how to deal with the fact that we can't always socially distance in our line of work. So it does allow us to get closer together and to not always maintain social distancing. That's an important thing to realise, that we're not going to be kept away from each other or told that we can't dance together. It's just that when that does happen, obviously the risks are increased. So there are a number of things that we'll need to do to try and control those risks a bit better. So that's the government guidance about kind of workplace safety in the workplace. And then what we'll be developing with our dance medicine and science expert panel is the kind of the dancer's body, the dancer's health kind of guidance. Is how do we need to look after our bodies and be careful and sensible about getting back to practice and getting back to fitness when we haven't been able to move in a big space for quite a long time. But both of those things are things that we're working on.
Great, thank you very much. There was a question about spaces and whether there's a way for us to open up spaces that could be available to freelancers. Lauren, I think it was from you. Are you there? Do you want to chip in here?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that'd be great to just hear your thoughts.
Gorgeous to see you all.
To the Mayor's office, who've done a big audit already of dance spaces in the capital.
Yeah, so we at Siobhan Davis Studios are working toward opening in July, and I'm aware that folks won't all be able to reach us. And I'm just thinking, is there a way of getting a sense of spaces across London that are opening and their various constraints so that people can locate space that's close to them? We're trying to make the space available for as low cost as we possibly can, but are aware that not everybody can reach us. So it's just thinking, is there an easy way to map that for artists to be able to find?
Okay. I think it's something quite concrete that it's possible that the Mayor's Office might be able to help us with. And Rosie, I think it was you that mentioned about the empty theatres and how they could be used or shared to local artists and independents, which I know has been discussed in terms of school spaces and going into churches and theatres and other civic spaces, but it's definitely something from our side in terms of choreographic practice that could also be taken advantage of. So there was a question also about how people are coping with the Groundhog Day feeling of how we're currently living. I don't know if any of the speakers want to just chip in about how they're managing that or how they're keeping going.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that, because I just think it's quite interesting that this isolation is something, as a freelance artist, and I'm sure a lot of other people on this chat will agree, we often feel isolated as freelancers. So this is really not unusual. The only difference is the whole world has joined us in this isolation and sometimes loneliness. But I do agree with what Rosemary Lee was saying, which is about it is a great time for reflection. And you know, in 1 year, I always have a period of about 3 or 4 months where it's the unknown. I call it the wilderness moment, and it's the time where I reflect and I re-energize, and I always feel as if I come out much more powerful. So yeah, I think we need to give ourselves permission to grieve. We need to give ourselves permission to reflect.